How could the world's first great civilization crumble into obscurity? Welcome to Collapse, where giants fall. Between the fertile banks of the Tigris and the Euphrates, a legendary civilization emerged, one that defied time, nature, and adversity. The Sumerians, architects of the first cities, inventors of writing, and stewards of social order, laid the earliest foundations of human civilization. Yet no empire endures forever. Over time, their brilliance began to fade. Sacred temples, once vibrant with ritual, now lie in ruin, worn by wind and time. Of kings who once ruled with divine authority, only names etched into clay remain. Silent witnesses to a forgotten glory. How could such a visionary people vanish? What secrets lie buried in the dust, whispering of the fall of the world's first great masters? This is a fascinating journey, one that returns us to the dawn of civilization itself. At the edge of what we now call Iraq lies one of the most fertile regions of the ancient world, Mesopotamia. The very name means the land between the rivers, a reference to the Tigris and Euphrates, two life-giving arteries that carved their way to the Persian Gulf, leaving behind rich, silty soil in their wake. This natural bounty gave rise to unprecedented cereal agriculture, allowing ancient nomadic groups to slowly abandon their wandering ways. With the rise of farming, humanity's path took a decisive turn toward settlement, community, and eventually civilization. To truly grasp the origins of Sumerian greatness, we must first consider what came before. The Neolithic era, from around 10,000 to 4000 BCE, marked the agricultural revolution, a profound shift from foraging to farming. In Lower Mesopotamia, this shift was dramatic. Formerly mobile clans chose to settle near the rivers. The unpredictable flooding of the Tigris and Euphrates posed logistical challenges, but their nutrient-rich floodplains promised immense agricultural rewards. In this arid climate, irrigation was key. Early peoples built rudimentary canals, basins, and dikes to manage their water supply. Villages sprang up where even basic irrigation systems could take root, and with water management came social complexity. Leaders emerged to oversee canal systems and cereal distribution, the early blueprints of political power. As agriculture expanded, so too did the domestication of animals. Sheep and goats were the first to be tamed for meat, milk, and wool, followed by other livestock essential to daily life and economic exchange. By 6500 BCE, the Ubaid period had begun, ushering in a pivotal pre-urban phase. Archaeological discoveries from this era reveal a society growing more sophisticated. Pottery shaped on the wheel, tools of increasing precision, and buildings constructed from sun-dried mud bricks. Many of these villages housed sanctuaries, the earliest signs of organized religion. Here, deities linked to fertility, rain, and harvest were worshipped by communities aware of their dependence on nature's whims. The Uruk period, from roughly 4000 to 3100 BCE, marks a critical transformation, the rise of the first true city-states. These independent urban centers, the earliest in human history, took shape in what would become Sumer, in the southern reaches of Mesopotamia. For these cities, water was life. Canals fed by the Tigris and Euphrates irrigated vast barley and wheat fields. The more organized the society, the greater the harvest. The greater the harvest, the denser the population. This led to the emergence of autonomous city-states, compact urban hubs wielding political and economic power over their surrounding lands. Each city-state operated like a small kingdom, governed by its own administration. Power typically centered around two poles, the temple and the palace. Cities such as Uruk, Ur, Kish, and Lagash grew into sprawling centers of human activity. At its peak, Uruk alone may have housed 40,000 people, a staggering figure for the ancient world. The expansion of these cities was driven not only by agriculture, but by trade. Lacking local resources like stone, metal, or timber, the Sumerians forged long-distance commercial networks. Caravans and riverboats carried goods to and from the Zagros Mountains and Upper Mesopotamia. linking Sumer with distant lands. While city-states traded, they also clashed. Proximity bred both cooperation and competition. Access to irrigation canals often sparked conflict, while ambitions of territorial expansion led to intermittent warfare. These interactions fueled innovation. New pottery techniques emerged, including the widespread use of the potter's wheel. Decorative motifs evolved. Kiln technologies improved. Agricultural surpluses allowed for labor specialization, artisans, builders, and, crucially, scribes. And with the scribes came writing. Initially, the temples used small clay tokens sealed in envelopes to record transactions. Livestock, grain, oil. Eventually, symbols were impressed directly into clay tablets, a far more efficient method. These pictograms, simple images representing objects or ideas, gradually evolved. With the use of reed styluses, pictograms became more abstract, transforming into wedge-shaped marks. Thus, cuneiform was born. This innovation revolutionized record-keeping. Beyond accounting, writing began to preserve myths, royal decrees, hymns, and chronicles. The scribe became a revered figure, central to administration, law, and religion. Writing gave birth to memory. It allowed cities to archive decisions, codify laws, and document the divine legitimacy of their kings. Temples engraved offerings in stone, perpetuating worship across generations. With each tablet, civilization deepened its roots. Power structures also evolved. Early tribal leaders, once merely facilitators of water distribution or ritual, became city rulers. These elites invested heavily in temples, which doubled as economic and religious hubs. Sumerian society was distinctly hierarchical. At the top stood the king, the Lugal, or great man. He often ruled alongside a religious elite and in some cases held both political and sacred authority. Below them, scribes and artisans managed civic life and produced valuable goods. The majority, farmers, shepherds, canal workers, supported the system through labor and tribute. At the bottom were slaves, often war captives or debtors, without rights, their fates tied to temples or individual owners. Markets were lively. With no minted currency, people bartered goods or used silver, grain, or even shaped metal as proto-money. Contracts, etched into clay, recorded debts and deliveries. Religious festivals punctuated life, tied to the agricultural cycle, with parades, music, offerings, and sacrifices intended to appease gods and ensure prosperity. Urban bureaucracy blossomed. Temples and palaces maintained armies of scribes to oversee everything: grain tallies, irrigation plans, tax records, and labor quotas. Writing enabled this surge in administrative complexity. Even daily life was shaped by these developments. Homes were built from mud bricks. Clean water was a constant concern. Communities erected walls to defend against rival cities, for political unity remained elusive. Between 3000 and 2500 BCE, the Sumerian city-states entered a golden age, marked by stability, architectural brilliance, and extensive trade. Cities like Uruk, Ur, and Kish flourished. Their fertile hinterlands meticulously irrigated, their centers dominated by ziggurats, massive stepped temples reaching toward the heavens. Trade routes extended from Mesopotamia to Anatolia, the Levant, and Iran. Sumerian merchants traveled with caravans bearing textiles, grain, and crafted goods, returning with timber, copper, tin, and lapis lazuli, vital for adornment and ritual. At the heart of all life was religion. The Sumerian pantheon was rich and complex. Enlil, god of air and sovereignty, An, the sky god. Enki, guardian of wisdom and fresh waters. Inanna, or Ishtar, goddess of love and war, especially venerated in Uruk. Nanna, the moon god. Utu, the sun god and arbiter of justice. Kings acted as intermediaries between gods and people. Their rule was sanctified through ritual. Steles and tablets depicted them as divine protégés, chosen to lead by the heavens. Sumerian mythology, once oral, took written form. The Epic of Gilgamesh, though best known in later versions, originated in this period. The tale of Gilgamesh and Enkidu is a poetic meditation on friendship, mortality, and the search for meaning, mirroring the Sumerian worldview. Cuneiform texts and archaeological finds paint a detailed picture of daily life. Though patriarchal, Sumerian society gave women some agency, particularly in religious life. High priestesses, especially those serving Inanna, wielded considerable influence. Education, too, was crucial. Temple schools trained scribes in writing and mathematics, including the sexagesimal system, whose legacy endures in our 60-minute hours and 360-degree circles. In all, the Sumerians did not merely build cities, they forged a blueprint for civilization, one whose echoes still resonate today. Mastering accounting became a vital skill, essential for managing stockpiles, collecting taxes, and coordinating large-scale public works. Sumerian art is notable for its refinement and attention to detail. Many exquisite gold jewelry pieces, often inlaid with lapis lazuli, a deep blue stone imported all the way from Afghanistan, showcase this craftsmanship. Artisans also created finely engraved cylinder seals, rolled over wet clay to indicate ownership or to authenticate official documents. Temples were adorned with votive statues, small stone or limestone sculptures of worshippers, wide-eyed and hands clasped in eternal prayer. These figures stood in perpetual devotion before the gods, symbolizing the unceasing piety of their donors. Despite the relative stability of this era, rivalry between city-states was a constant thread in Sumerian history. Water, vital to survival, often sparked disputes. A mismanaged canal or diverted dam could destroy a neighboring city's crops, igniting bitter conflict. One of the most famous of these confrontations occurred between the cities of Lagash and Umma, who fought over a disputed stretch of fertile land. The king of Lagash, Eannatum, ultimately triumphed and immortalized his victory in the Stele of the Vultures, a carved monument depicting his soldiers confronting the enemy. But Sumer was not solely a land of internal strife. The city-states maintained regular exchanges with Elam, a region located in what is now southwestern Iran. These interactions, both commercial and cultural, fostered the flow of metals, wood, precious stones, and ideas. Some Sumerian rulers even sought peace or advantage through foreign alliances, hiring mercenaries or inviting skilled artisans from abroad to enhance their production workshops. Sumer's renown spread far beyond its borders. Caravanners and merchants spoke of its grand cities, towering temples, masterful goldsmiths, and abundant harvests. Nomadic tribes from the northern and eastern highlands viewed these flourishing lands with envy, prompting the Sumerians to fortify their cities and raise militias. Between 2500 and 2330 BCE, the Sumerian city-states continued to thrive. Yet their golden age began to fray. Political rivalries intensified as each city vied to dominate Lower Mesopotamia, but none succeeded in establishing a stable, lasting empire. In this context, three dynasties stand out: Ur and Uruk, with their enduring religious and cultural influence; Lagash, known for the bold reforms of Uruk-agina; and Kish, a northern city that would later rise in prominence. By the early 3rd millennium BCE, Uruk had already earned prestige as a city steeped in myth and spiritual legacy. Ur, on the other hand, was famed for its devotion to Nanna, the moon god. Among the legendary rulers of this time, none is more famous than Gilgamesh, said to have reigned in Uruk. Though his story straddles the line between history and myth, cuneiform texts describe him as a mighty builder king, credited with constructing massive walls around his city, remnants of which were later uncovered by archaeologists. In legend, Gilgamesh's exploits include fantastical feats, a quest for immortality, and a deep friendship with the wild man Enkidu. Tales that would be immortalized in the Epic of Gilgamesh, one of the world's oldest literary works. Though he may not be entirely historical, Gilgamesh represents a real truth. Sumerian kings often sought to immortalize themselves through grand monuments and the assertion of personal power. Uruk, with its spiritual antiquity and monumental scale, aspired to regional dominance. Often called Ur of the Chaldees in later biblical texts, though anachronistically, experienced a series of ambitious rulers who extended influence through military campaigns, dynastic marriages, and trade agreements. The cult of Nana served as a unifying force, and the moon god's temple, a ziggurat, became not only a religious center but an economic hub where offerings of grain, livestock, and precious metals were collected. The rulers of Ur maintained the title Ensi, a term translating roughly as governor or prince. The Ensi held both political authority and religious responsibility, organizing sacred rites to ensure agricultural prosperity and social cohesion. Ur's location, near what was then a broader Persian Gulf coastline, gave it access to maritime trade routes that reached the Indus Valley and present-day Oman. This helped cement the city's wealth and strategic importance. Within the Sumerian mosaic, Lagash emerged during the mid-3rd millennium as a dynamic and often combative city. It frequently clashed with its neighbor Umma over vital irrigation canals and fertile territories. Amid this backdrop of tension, social inequality deepened. Temple administrators were accused of corruption, and records speak of widespread discontent among the peasantry. Heavily taxed and conscripted for public labor, the lower classes bore the burden of financing war and maintaining the canals. Around 2350 BCE, a reformer named Urukagina rose to power in Lagash. From the outset, he distanced himself from his predecessors by confronting a growing societal rot: corruption. In a world dominated by priestly elites and bureaucratic officials, he introduced reforms without precedent. Priests, once unchecked, were now forbidden from demanding exorbitant offerings in the name of sacred rituals. Judicial corruption was addressed, judges accused of taking bribes were placed under surveillance, and courts were ordered to operate on fairer principles. But perhaps his boldest act was debt reform. Aware of how crushing loans had enslaved the lower classes, Urukagina cancelled some debts and freed those who had been forced into servitude. It was a revolutionary move, one of the first recorded acts of debt forgiveness in human history. These reforms, detailed in cuneiform inscriptions unearthed in Lagash, are among the earliest known examples of social legislation. They anticipated the famed law codes that would later emerge across Mesopotamia, including those of Ur-Nammu and Hammurabi. In his writings, Urukagina emphasized justice and divine mercy. He presented himself not as a tyrant, but as the protector of widows and orphans, a restorer of the balance that the gods had intended. Under Shulgi's reign, the third dynasty of Ur extended its influence over much of Lower Mesopotamia. Trade routes to Iran and Syria became essential for the exchange of metals, timber, and luxury goods. Archival texts mention military campaigns and the establishment of control posts in peripheral regions. Scribes meticulously recorded tributes paid by conquered territories, further enriching the capital and reinforcing royal authority. Cuneiform tablets reveal a surprising facet of Shulgi. He is credited with composing hymns in his own honor, extolling his warrior strength, political wisdom, and even musical talents. Though the degree of propaganda in these writings remains uncertain, they reflect a sovereign deeply concerned with his image, convinced that cultural prestige should accompany military power. Thanks to centralized administration, urban development accelerated. Ziggurats were expanded or renovated, and construction techniques improved. Bricks became more uniform and better fired. Workers were more effectively supervised, often drawn from the scribal elite. Irrigation canals, vital in this arid climate, were repaired or redesigned to combat water shortages. Major Sumerian cities began adopting more structured layouts, organized around temples, palaces, and residential quarters. The Ur-3 period also saw the flourishing of a vibrant literary culture. Scribes transcribed hymns, prayers, and myths onto clay tablets, preserving oral traditions. Cuneiform writing reached remarkable levels of sophistication, both in sign variety and alignment precision. Scribe schools emerged, allowing more individuals to master reading and writing. The economy relied on a centralized redistribution system. Temples and palaces collected barley, wool, and fish. then redistributed these according to the needs of the population and the army. This model, often referred to as a palatial economy, ensured a minimum level of subsistence for all, while granting the royal authority tight control over resources. Farmers, craftsmen, and scribes received rations and privileges in exchange for their labor. Large-scale construction projects, such as temples, palaces, and fortifications, demanded significant manpower, which the state secured by mobilizing local populations or drawing laborers from nearby regions. Among the many archaeological sites from this era, the city of Pusrish Dagan, sometimes identified with Pish Danan, exemplifies the power of Sumerian bureaucracy. Thousands of tablets discovered there document the distribution of livestock for sacrifices and religious festivals, tracking each animal's origin, age, use, and even diet. These records, including officials' names and dates, allow modern historians to reconstruct the intricate workings of the state apparatus. After centuries of prosperity, Sumerian cities experienced sharp population growth. The dynamism of construction, commerce, and governance attracted large numbers of inhabitants. But this demographic boom placed mounting pressure on resources, especially cereal production. In the semi-arid environment of Lower Mesopotamia, intensive agriculture required continuous use of irrigated plots. With high evaporation rates, irrigation water left behind salt deposits, leading to soil salinization, a phenomenon that severely hindered plant growth. Over time, agricultural yields declined, leading to periodic food shortages. Cuneiform tablets reference famines and disputes between cities over the use of still viable plots. Though the Sumerians attempted to improve irrigation, introducing spill basins and one-way canals, these systems required constant upkeep and a large labor force. Disparities in water distribution led to tensions. Diverting a canal to irrigate one city could dry out another's fields. These disputes, often violent, damaged the shared infrastructure upon which all cities depended. Maintaining stability in this context required cooperation, and crucially, a central authority capable of regulating water use. But this authority was far from consistent. City-states acted primarily in their own interests. Soil salinization and unequal irrigation management gradually eroded Sumer's agricultural foundations. Beyond agriculture, prosperity brought its own vulnerabilities. The vast hierarchical administration created under the third dynasty of became increasingly burdensome. Scribes managed stocks of grain, livestock, and textiles, while other officials collected taxes. Initially efficient, this bloated bureaucracy became costly and inflexible, stifling local initiative. The gap between elite and commoner widened. Levies in kind, grain, wool, livestock, as well as corvée labor for canal maintenance or ziggurat construction, weighed heavily on ordinary people. Many indebted farmers were forced to forfeit their harvests or serve in temples or palaces to repay loans. This led to internal unrest. Revolts, banditry, and formal complaints emerged, some preserved in cuneiform tablets, where peasants accused governors of imposing unfair taxes. The situation worsened as royal demands grew to fund ongoing wars. Succession disputes, especially after the death of strong rulers like Shulgi, led to civil strife. With no clear rules for succession, rival claimants sparked coups and internal conflict. Simultaneously, royal control over the provinces weakened. Governors, once appointed by the king, sought to assert their own independence, especially in regions far from Slow and dangerous communication further undermined central authority. This growing provincial autonomy limited the state's ability to demand tributes, mobilize troops, or maintain defensive networks. The multiplication of internal and external military threats overwhelmed the administration. Economic decline followed, taxes dwindled, infrastructure deteriorated, and morale faded. Disunified and fractured, the Sumerian state became vulnerable to invasion. A divided land, governed by competing powers, was ripe for conquest. Sustaining a large empire required immense resources. Armies, fortifications, public works, all funded by taxes. But incessant warfare disrupted trade. Merchants avoided dangerous routes, reducing commercial activity and tax revenues. Exports of textiles, grain, and crafts suffered. Labor shortages, theft, and soldier extortion added to the burden. War, once a source of prestige, was now seen as wasteful and destabilizing. As commerce faltered, the state's finances collapsed in a vicious cycle of decline. At the same time, Sumer faced external threats on all sides. To the west, Semitic Amorite tribes settled along the Euphrates, forming local principalities as Sumerian control weakened. Some seized existing cities, establishing their own dynasties. To the east, the Elamites, longtime trading partners, launched organized raids to plunder temples and claim territory. In the north, nomadic and mountain tribes like the Gutians, Hurrians, and Suberians carried out sporadic incursions, looting livestock and extorting tribute. By 2004 BCE, itself came under coordinated attack from the Elamites and their allies. The city's walls fell, temples were sacked, inhabitants were taken captive. Cuneiform accounts describe widespread destruction, palaces burned, fields abandoned, and mass exodus. Already weakened by internal strife, the state could no longer defend itself. Governors, seeking survival, cut deals with the invaders, populations fled, cities emptied, and agriculture and craftsmanship collapsed. Sumerian texts interpret this disaster as divine punishment. According to these laments, the gods Enlil and Inanna turned their backs on due to elite corruption and human ingratitude. The fall of was seen as a spiritual rupture between the divine and mortal realms, reflecting the profound despair of the time, and the Sumerian belief that politics, morality, and religion were deeply intertwined. Climatic shifts may have compounded these problems. Evidence suggests decreased rainfall and disrupted seasonal patterns around this time, leading to weaker floods in the Tigris and Euphrates. Irrigation became harder to manage, driving further population movements into fertile areas and increasing pressure on already strained resources. Faced with salinization, political instability, bureaucratic excess, invasions, and climate stress, Sumerian society could no longer adapt in time. Its resilience was exhausted. By the early 2nd millennium BCE, Sumer's great cities had fragmented. Amorite leaders took control of urban centers, blending Sumerian traditions with Semitic culture. One such city, Babylon, previously minor, rose to prominence. Under the Amorite dynasty, it became the center of a powerful new kingdom. The Babylonian king Hammurabi, for instance, would later unify much of Mesopotamia. His famous code of laws drew upon earlier Sumerian legal traditions, including the Code of Ur-Nammu. The idea of written, divinely sanctioned laws, applicable to all, found its roots in Sumer. Despite political changes, the Sumerian writing system endured. Babylonian scribes considered it a scholarly language and continued to use cuneiform for administration, religion, and literature. Over time, the Sumerian language ceased to be spoken in daily life, but it persisted much like Latin in medieval Europe, reserved for ceremonial and intellectual use. Sumerian deities were gradually absorbed into the Semitic pantheon. The god Marduk, for example, rose to prominence in Babylon and supplanted older gods. Still, Sumerian culture did not vanish. Temples, accounting methods, and myths, like the Epic of Gilgamesh, survived. Babylonian, Assyrian, and even later Persian scribes preserved these traditions. Traces of Sumerian thought would influence the Hebrew Bible and even early astronomy, such as the sexagesimal base 60 system still used to divide time and measure angles today. After Ur's fall, Mesopotamia returned to a mosaic of rival cities, Larsa, Mari, Babylon, Eshnunna, all vying for power through shifting alliances and wars. Trade routes shifted toward Anatolia, the Mediterranean, and the Indus Valley, expanding the circulation of goods and ideas. Looking back, we see that many modern institutions have deep roots in Sumerian civilization. Their cuneiform writing was the first true written communication system. Through it, they documented contracts, literature, and diplomacy, laying the foundation of archives and state administration. Their innovations in counting, irrigation, law, and urban planning shaped how societies evolved. Even their conception of kingship as a divine mission to maintain order would echo through Egyptian, Assyrian, and Babylonian ideologies. Sumer was not merely an ancient culture, it was a laboratory of innovation. Its imprint, though scattered by the forces of history, remains one of the cornerstones upon which human civilization was built.